days of moon.
We have an unidentified flying object.
We are here with astronaut Edgar Mitchell from Apollo 14 and have served in the Navy, appeared in the Citizen Hearing, in the movie Thrive, and so much more. Dr. Mitchell, it's a pleasure to have you back on. Of course, you wrote the preface for Dr. Roger Lear's book, who sadly passed away before he got to see the book released, and he was a big mentor to us and a good friend of mine. What impact did he have to you and to the rest of the world? Because obviously to us, the world is definitely a smaller place without him.
Well, we didn't have that much interaction a bit. We knew each other, but we weren't really that close, as a matter of fact.
Now, you were on the third mission to the moon, which was right after Apollo 13. How did you feel going on that mission, knowing that?
Apollo 13 was initially my mission due to circumstances, and that was the way we planned things in those days. You served backup crew, and then 3 flights later, you were eligible for a prime crew. I served backup on Apollo 10 with Gordon Cooper, which meant we would be for Apollo 13. But Gordon wanted to retire after he had been in the program for quite some time, and wanted to retire after Apollo 10. And Alan Shepard, who had been grounded with an inner ear problem, had that fixed and wanted to come back on status. And that was approved at Houston, but in Washington they said, Alan, you ought to take a little more time to train. So they forced a switch between our crew, which would have been Apollo 13, and the then Apollo 14 crew, Jim Lovell's crew. And so they took 13, we took 14. They got a bad machine. We got the good machine. And so we actually ended up flying the Apollo 13 mission. We just called it Apollo 14.
Now, when you arrived on the moon and you stepped foot off the craft, off the LEM, and you saw the Earth in the moon's position when, for instance, we'd be on Earth looking at the moon, how did you feel looking at the Earth in such a way?
Well, that came later. We were so busy doing what we had to do. We had a timeline, we had a checklist that we had to accomplish, limited time to do it. We had practiced it dozens of times on Earth. So our focus when we landed on the moon was get the job done. And so for the 9 hours we were out on the lunar surface, 2 hours each of almost 5 hours. We had to have a little time to get in and back out. But we were doing what we'd practiced on Earth, and that was our focus at the time. So looking back at Earth, although it was right overhead, wasn't a thing we had a chance to really do until we'd finished our mission and were ready to come home. And of course, looking at Earth from deep space for the first time is really a powerful experience.
Now, you've accomplished so much in your life, everything from being in the Navy, the pilot, you have a PhD, you were an astronaut. What would you say was the best time of your life? Was it during the NASA missions?
I've had a wonderful life, but I have been able to accomplish a lot of things, and going to the moon, of course, is the highlight of the thing, and it's been my large accomplishment. But my Noetic Foundation that I started after coming back from the moon has been a very large accomplishment, and we have we helped start the study of consciousness in science, and helped make it an important part of scientific discovery.
In your Noetic, your foundation that you started, you were studying the consciousness, and I remember you appeared in the movie Thrive, and there was this course that I took that you also took about subliminal memory. Do you recall anything about that? How does meditating and consciousness and everything link up with what we're doing on Earth today?
Well, I helped write the book on this, but the whole point is we've learned just in our century, and in large measure due to scientists of my group, and that what we're talking about is a quantum phenomenon. And that was at the end of the 19th century when Max Planck, Einstein, and the greats were wrestling with physics and ultimately organized it by the 1920s in what we now call quantum physics. That was not really accepted as what it turns out to be, that it was a more important than, well, let me put it in a slightly different way, that since the time of Newton and Kepler in the 15th, 16th centuries, the mind and consciousness was not considered an appropriate subject for science, thanks to what's called the Cartesian duality of several hundred years of standing. But quantum mechanics during the 20th century helped us realize that it's a more fundamental property of nature than just matter and energy, and so we have to include consciousness as a fundamental aspect of the universe that we live in. And that is fairly new work that has kind of taken over in science or become popular in science just in the last part of the 20th century into the 21st century, and I've been an intimate part of that.
Exactly. I totally agree with you that it's definitely taken a form in the sense of more scientists are accepting and understanding and realizing. What would you like to see the future of science with regards to quantum mechanics and quantum physics be? Or what do you
Well, our whole point is to understand the universe that we live in. It's the cosmology that people have been asking forever. How did all this begin? What is it? How's it put together? What's out there? And, of course, our knowledge in science, physics, chemistry, astronomy, all of these great topics that help us understand our universe better are advancing at very nice rates, but we still don't have all the answers by any means to how our universe is organized, how it formed, where it came from. But all that work is going on in a very powerful way.
I definitely agree. And speaking of space and going back to the moon, obviously China landed on the moon since we last spoke with their drone, but we still have yet to have another human be on the moon since the 70s when you were during Apollo missions. Do you know why we stopped going to the moon, and do you see the United States sending a human back to the moon anytime soon?
Well, I don't know how soon, but yes, we have a lot more to discover. Let me point out and remind you that when the Wright brothers flew the first airplane in the early 20th century, 20 years later we had a private airline industry. Well, the same thing is kind of happening now, that after going to the moon in the Apollo program, we have a number of entrepreneurs, Branson and Elon Musk and Bob Bigelow in Great Britain, here in the United States, that have been aspiring to create presence in space as a business, and they're successfully doing so. However, we still have the problem that in due course we're going to have to be off this planet because it won't last forever. The sun will burn out. We're not living sustainably on the planet at this time. We're overpopulating and consuming non-renewable resources at too fast a rate. So we're going to have to change our ways, or we're going to utilize everything on our planet in an unacceptable way. So we're either going to go better and further and faster, like the ETs that come here, or we're going to do ourselves in.
You know, you made such a good point, and that's actually leading to the next question that I had written for this. The children of the future, the ones that are being born today or have been born in the last decade or so, are obviously in a time of a horrific change with all these wars going on, like you said, overpopulation and, you know, these diseases, very different from what was going on when you were growing up. What can you tell them to do to help themselves and help our planet and help the human civilization as a whole?
Well, my whole theory and my approach to life has been for many, many years to serve the greater good. And right now the greater good is to help create a sustainable civilization. And when people are ready to do that, instead of focusing on all their effort on just themselves and making money and doing the things that please them, but get their satisfaction in life out of serving the greater good, then we have a chance of solving some of these problems. Otherwise, I'm afraid we're very likely to put ourselves in a position of becoming an extinct species.
Agreed. And some people say that the reason why we've been increased in visitation is particularly following the use of the atomic testing by extraterrestrials is because they see us destroying ourselves. Do you see us, them interfering at all in preventing us from destroying our planet, or are they just idly possibly watching by?
No. I think there's quite a bit of evidence. For example, during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, between the United States and the Soviet Union, and we had missile sites established along the northern border of the United States with missiles prepared to be launched toward the Soviet Union. I know Air Force officers who were at those stations and responsible, and they reported on many, many occasions UFOs were there and disabled their missiles. So there is a good lore here, a good history, that our ET visitors, at least some of them, were doing their best to keep us from getting into another world war.
You're absolutely right there. As a matter of fact, when you testified via Skype to the citizen hearing, one of the testimonies came from Captain Robert Salas, who we've had on the air here a couple of times, and he just talked about the Malmstrom Air Force Base incident, which was just one of many where a UFO came and shut down the missile silos. So I see your point there, that they're definitely concerned. Do you think we'll ever see disclosure, by meaning that the President of the United States will actually stand up and say, hey, this is what's happened, we're not alone? Or do you think it's going to come more about of a way that each person having their own experiences and expanding their consciousness and maybe making their own contact in such a way? What do you see the future of disclosure?
I can't project what our government's going to do. However, there are a number of foreign governments, Britain, Belgium, I believe France, South American governments, Brazil, Mexico, have all opened their files on UFOs. So it's not in a certain part of the world. It's not a state secret that we've been visited. And I think this will open up in due course.
I absolutely agree with you. Times are definitely changing. It is not so much taboo anymore to be talking about this, where it was in the 80s and 90s to talk about anything past Roswell. You were labeled one of the tinfoil hats. Nonetheless, I definitely agree with you. If you have one final message for all the listeners and viewers of Third Phase of Moon, what would you have to say to them?
Well, I think we've just said it. Let's focus on serving the greater good with our individual efforts, and being public citizens instead of so much interested in our totally devoted to our private life and our private wealth, and see if we can save this planet.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Third phase of moon.
Was initially my mission due to circumstances, and that was the way we planned things in those days. You served backup crew, and then 3 flights later you were eligible for a prime crew. I served backup on Apollo 10 with Gordon Cooper, which meant we would be for Apollo 13.
Third phase of moon.
We have an unidentified flying object.
Dr. Roger Lear's book, who sadly passed away before he got to see the book released. And he was a big mentor to us and a good friend of mine. What impact did he have to you and to the rest of the world? Because obviously to us, the world is definitely a smaller place without him.
Well, we didn't have that much interaction, a bit. We knew each other, but we weren't really that close, as a matter of fact.
Now, you were on the third mission to the moon, which was right after Apollo 13. How did you feel going on that mission, knowing that?
Well, Apollo 13.
We are here with astronaut Edgar Mitchell from Apollo 14, and have served in the Navy, appeared in the Citizen Hearing, in the movie Thrive, and so much more. Dr. Mitchell, it's a pleasure to have you back on. Of course, you wrote the preface for